The Stage Door Show, celebrating the independent artist. All right, everybody, thanks for joining us once again. This is The Stage Door Show, and I am your host, Steve Zarro, filling in for Dave Hondell and Tom Klein. I'm joined tonight by a friend of mine, author and novelist Rick Treon, whose audiobook I had the grand privilege of narrating just a little bit over a year ago. Rick, how you doing tonight? Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Steve. I'm doing all right. It's, I think it's, a little bit under 100 degrees out here in the Texas Panhandle. So
nice.
I'm staying inside and keeping cool when I can.
Well, I lived in Southeast North Carolina for a while. I know those temperatures, but they had really bad humidity problems down there. It was oppressive. Where you are is more of a dry heat, though, you would say? Okay.
Yeah, it's not quite desert, but it's pretty arid.
Right.
Which is definitely better. I was surprised when I was in New York City for Thriller Fest this time last year. I never thought about how humid it was going to be, but then I thought, well, duh, I'm right next to, an ocean. Like, of course it's going to be humid. So I definitely was sweating through my shirts a lot more. I definitely packed everything. It was long sleeve and long pants. I didn't think to bring a whole lot of shorts and, golf shirts and stuff just to wear whenever I was, walking around the city and stuff. So I felt kind of dumb.
I grew up in the New York area, so I'm no stranger to that. But I moved to Southeast North Carolina in my late 20s, early 30s for just a handful of years. And I don't know if you've ever been in that part of the country, man. It's like soup. The humidity is so bad. You cannot, July and August, you just have, unless you're going to be submerged in water, you have no business being outside the house in July and August. It's that bad. It's really ugly.
Whenever I went to school at UT in Austin, and so coming from up here to down there, not as bad, obviously, the humidity and all that, but I'll bet that, first few weeks on campus, I must have drank a gallon of water a day just to replace the sweat. I was so not used to it. And then I would come up home and I'd be like, why is it so dry up here? And then spend a summer and then go back down and do the whole process again.
When I was living down south, I was even heavier than I am now. It was before I had my bariatric surgery. And I was doing outdoor Shakespeare lakeside in this place called Greenfield Lake Amphitheater in Wilmington, North Carolina. And it was Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights, 4 nights a week, every week in June. We would do Shakespeare on this nice stage in an amphitheater right by this alligator-ridden and snake-ridden lake. No fences or anything. And we even had to have a curtain speech in the beginning. We'd tell people, once the sun goes down, please do not go down by the water. Yeah. And we were down by the water. But I was playing Baptista in The Taming of the Shrew, and I was wearing this it was basically a black graduation cloak, but like it was made of theater curtain. It wasn't like a flowy, satiny thing. It was made of this heavy curtain. And my God, so the director, we come out in costumes the first night. We're doing our dress rehearsal during Tech Week. And the director looks at me and I'm like 325 in this thing. And it's just like free running water down my face, not even like droplets of sweat. It's just streaming down. He looks at me, he goes, man, you better drink a lot of Gatorade this month.
Yeah.
There was no getting around
bananas so you don't cramp up.
Oh my God. And your voice gets dry, you dehydrate. Your muscles cramp. It was a mess. And it was hot. So hot. I was like, yeah, sure. Give me all black head to toe sleeves. Yeah, sure. Put it all on me. 20 pounds worth. Yeah, I'll take it all. All right. So let's talk for a little while about what it's like for you as an independent artist, as a novelist and an author. Well, what kind of process do you have first, what sort of process did you go through in transitioning from whatever sort of life you had before? I don't know if you had a survival job before, or if you always wanted to be a writer, were you writing since school? Like, how did you transition into where you are now as novelist Rick Treon? Deep background.
Well, I guess I knew ever since high school that I wanted to write, to do a lot of writing. It's not only what I was good at, but what I enjoyed doing. Whenever you go back to edit this, I'm sure you'll find that I'm a better writer than I am speaker. So I put my thoughts down on words a little better than I do, when they're coming out of my mouth. But, I thought, journalism would be a safe way to earn a paycheck. And, whenever I was graduating high school in 2004, it was. And, I did, here in Texas, we have the UIL academics, which is, it's like a whole bunch of different contests with specific subjects. I don't know how other states may do it. Kind of like an academic bowl, I guess, sort of a deal. But they had the journalism contest, and I got entered because the teachers knew I could write, and they had nobody doing those events, kind of like a track meet. If you can throw the discus, well, they'll have you do the shot put just in case you place, earn
So
some points for the team.
you were not writing journalism at the time. You were just writing free form, and you got.
Yeah, just in high school. Like
Mhm.
we didn't even have a student newspaper at the time, and so I placed, in the events. And so then the next year, they just started, and this was back in like 2001. They started an online only newspaper for the school, so that me and some of the other kids could get practice, writing news stories and writing features and headlines, basically to feed the UIL, because we were really good and we wanted to win district every year, and it was competitive, and because a student newspaper is a thing, so why not do it? And we actually, by my senior year, had won some. I don't remember what it was, but it was a national. They kind of looked over all of the student newspapers that were hosted by this service, whatever, I think it's called iHigh.com or whatever.
Mhm.
And so we were recognized as one of the best in the country. So I was like, well, I guess that answers my question, what I should do in college. So, plus, you get to, write every day and string sentences together, and it's good practice. And in college at UT, I really fell in love with journalism and what it means to our democracy and to our society. And I went whole hog on that. And I was graduating college in 2008, which you may recall was a really bad time to be looking for jobs.
Right.
uh,
I'm familiar with that part of
yeah.
our history. Yeah.
But I was fortunate enough to get a correspondence job at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram doing sports, which was what I had focused on in college because played sports in high school. My favorite writer was Rick Riley, who had the back page column in Sports Illustrated. I wanted to be him before he went to ESPN magazine, and absolutely, was going full force with that. And then we had a restructuring at the newspaper where I was working, the Amarillo Globe News, and we all had to reapply for our jobs, and they ended up cutting a few. But I also applied to be a part of the new web department, an online department they were doing to, make the website better, do videos and stuff like that.
Right.
So I actually got a promotion out of that a little bit. So I went from sports writer to editor. And then, over the next probably 8 years or so, I ended up becoming the managing editor. And then I took the managing editor position at a different newspaper. And by that time, I was working with staffs, of 3 or 4 people, whereas whenever I joined the Amarillo Globe News sports staff, we had 7 sports writers, let alone the whole rest of the newsroom.
Right.
So that's how much everything had contracted. And it was just, 70, 80-hour weeks, and it was nothing to do with the people I was working for at all. There was just, you had to put a newspaper out every day, and there were only so many people to do it.
You're talking about an actual print copy, right? Not an online version or digital.
Well,
you're talking
both.
about a print copy. Well, both, but you're still talking about back when production was more mainstream than it is now, and more in demand than it is now. Even though it's sort of, I don't know, I've sort of equate the newspaper to radio in that they're both medias that are having a very long, extended death rattle. They're both kind of on their way out. They've been headed this way for some time. And what's interesting about when you came into writing, you said between 2004 2008 was when you were in college. Right around then, you still had very viable print distribution out there. And so, what was it like being a student of that material and of that world, and while it's going through that transition, coming into the digital world?
They did a good job of making sure that we could learn how to do all the online stuff. We started the first blog for the student newspaper, the Daily Texan, and I was part of several things that we did there. They started a podcast. I ended up being sports editor there, and we tried to do as much digital as we could. Started a sports blog and all that. And there were classes I learned. Online publishing, which now would be called Blogging 101, basically. I also took a coding class that was actually in the journalism school. So they did a good job of that. I don't feel like they prepared quite enough, and maybe because they didn't know or because they didn't want people to leave the program, but they didn't tell us how much everything was going digital. No matter what, I took it upon myself to do it because I felt like things were going that way, and it excited me. I liked computers. I'm not a computer whiz, but I could build web pages, and I did it in college, as part of the curriculum, but a lot of people didn't. So there's sort of a generation of us out there who got in the job market. It was like, oh, by the way, we're going to start cutting print distribution. We're going to stop publishing 7 days a week. And if you don't know how to, um, write a blog post right now, and if you can't do a little bit of your own HTML editing, well, I mean, who knows how long you'll have a job here. So
Right. Hmm.
they were good in some ways, and in some ways, I think they were still trying to protect the legacy newsprint part of it. But now, whenever I occasionally look at the journalism school's website, and they're definitely not making that mistake now. There's no, like you said, in its extended death rattle, and that's one of the reasons. There was a lot of pressure in the job. I'll be honest and say I probably, got to let it get to me too much, and I was also looking at the future, and there was no future in what I was really doing. And the people who were going to get the jobs for all of the online stuff were younger than I was, and that's me at 30 or
Right.
31 or whatever it
Right.
was. But it was the 20-year-old kids who were graduating, like they were graduating with the tools to go work, for Politico and Slate like today, whereas I would have had to have a lot of on-the-job training because I was still, for the first 10 years of my career, putting out a print newspaper every day. And then even whenever I was doing the online stuff, it was still, we were all still learning. It was the blind leading the blind. Whereas, by the time I was looking at leaving the industry, everything, I mean, I built my own website in 2 or 3 hours, my author
Right.
website after I made that decision. So, a lot of that was looking, my job's not going to be here whenever I'm, in my 50s. And it may be that news websites in general aren't here. Like even print versus online isn't even necessarily the issue now. It's, the media's lost the public's trust, which, I hate. I hate seeing that. It really, every time I read a news story about, quote, fake news or, newspaper slashing jobs, my heart aches a little bit, even though I'm not in the industry anymore. And so I figured, believe it or not, I thought that with the skills I had and, with the writer I thought I could be, think I can be, I had more of a future trying to build a new career in writing books and writing novels than I did sticking with journalism. And, I bet I know 2 or 3 people who I met early on in my career who are still practicing journalism in any capacity. So it's really,
That many have gotten out, huh? They moved
yeah.
on to like completely different
Oh
careers.
yeah.
Yeah.
A few went PR. One of them is like a general manager for like a security company. I mean, just and me, I've I do work to make sure I can pay my bills and stuff like that. But sometimes I call it research, sometimes I don't. And some of it legitimately, I got into research. It just also paid well. But I mean, I was going to start working for the Census Bureau this year because you keep your own hours, and I
Right.
could do all of it at once. And then COVID came, and I'm in their system, but they haven't called me for training yet, so I'm not quite sure how the rest of this whole
Yeah, I
year
feel like
looks.
COVID just came in and took a big shit on everybody's plan for
Yeah,
basically the entire second quarter and then some. My God. I that's one of the things I was going to get to. I was going to ask how you've been filling your time. But it sounds like from what we were talking about earlier, one of the things you're doing with your COVID time is writing and publishing novels, um, which we'll get to. But I thought it was interesting what you said about how you came out of college at an advantage. You had embraced this
mhm,
technology. You heard the train coming, you saw it, you felt the rumble, so you got on board with it. And even with that advantage, you still found yourself at 30, you said, nervous about the young guys, about,
yeah,
that's amazing. So what you decided to do basically is what a lot of independent artists do is they're aboard the big ship, the corporate ship. They're, the the bid, the survival job, whatever they call it these days. Everybody's got a different word for it. And they decide what they want to do is build their own ship alongside while they're still aboard and get it ready, get it seaworthy, get
Mhm.
it stocked and supplied, make sure it floats, plug all the leaks, get it all finished, and then just step off the big one onto the little one and sail away safely, nice and dry forever. And that's what you're doing. That's what a lot of the independent artists I know have tried to do as well. So that's awesome. And was deep background the first thing you had sort of out of your back pocket, or was there other preliminary stuff that didn't get released that you worked on before you released deep background?
Deep Background was the first manuscript I finished. Now, if you look at what I originally started writing and how it ended up, it's almost not even the same book. But technically, it was all one project. So,
Okay.
I do say that the first manuscript I finished did get bought by a small press and published by a small press. So, that doesn't always happen. Now, looking back, there are a couple ways to do it. I could have set that one aside when I didn't get a bigger like a big publishing deal with a big five or anything like that. And then, kept writing those and then wait for the big one to hit and get, at least a 5 or 6 figure deal. And some people do that. I was more, I want to, get into publishing and see what it's like and sort of learn on the job a little bit. Um, which is kind of how we did it in newspapers there for a while too. We were trying new things on the internet and trying new video editing software and all that stuff. So and if I were more business minded, I mean my dad started a small business whenever I was young, and so I think that kind of energy, I think I grew up around it, and I wanted to try doing that sort of stuff rather than work for another 5 or 6 years, even if it was getting a different sort of a day job that wasn't in journalism, because I had made the decision to leave that anyway. And then wait for the big publishing deal. I was all right with going with a smaller press. I wasn't super interested in necessarily self-publishing because I'm not a great, graphic artist and that sort of thing. And that's a lot of money up front. So, I definitely wanted to see if I could have, a publishing house do that part of it for me while I supplied the words and, did a lot of my own editing and stuff like that. But yeah,
So
so Deep Background was the first manuscript I finished. And then I immediately started working on the next one because I read on the internet that that's what you do. Turns out that, that advice was correct, but not all the advice on the internet's correct. So a lot of it going to things like Thriller Fest and becoming members of my local and national writers groups, talking to them, getting to know other authors, both who were self-publishing, which there's nothing wrong with. Like I said, I just wasn't interested. I wouldn't know what a great cover is until it hit me. So, for somebody else to present them to me, I can choose what I like. But if
right.
they ask, okay, so what concept do you want? I'm like, I don't know. I could give you examples of what, like James Patterson and Stephen King are doing, but my brain doesn't work visually necessarily like that. So I knew that would be tough if I were to do that piece of it on my own. Um,
Is that
and
what's
then
within the
people
domain
who
of
sign
self-publishing?
really,
Oh, I'm sorry for interrupting. I was just going to ask, is that what's involved when you have to publish your own book? You have to create your own cover, do that all yourself, find your own graphic artist and all that? Nobody helps you with any of that?
yeah, self-publishing, and a lot of times, like I think because it got such a bad rap saying self-published, they're calling themselves indie published.
Hmm.
And there's some confusion on whether independent publishers or self-publish is all indie publishing, and I'm not gonna necessarily parse it like that. But yeah, if you're self-publishing, if you start your own publishing company, which is what basically you do, you are in charge of either doing or hiring someone to do your cover, interior design, getting copyright and getting your Library of Congress number if you want, choosing the dimensions of your cover, choosing whether or not you want it to be slick finish versus a little bit of a matte finish. I mean, there's thousands of little bitty decisions to make.
Hmm.
And some people love that control, and every once in a while I wish I had that control too. But at the same time, that's not my area of expertise. My area of expertise is the writing and the words.
Hmm.
uh, and then if you go with super major publishing house, there are definitely compromises you have to make, whereas if you self-publish, you make all of the decisions. You hire an outside editor, but at the end of the day, you're the one uploading the file onto Kindle and or Ingram for the print versions and doing all that.
Right.
At an independent press, sometimes called a small press, although the big ones are like Kensington, which is not very small, but I mean, technically they're not corporate owned like the big five, you hear people say. It's kind of in the middle somewhere. We're more in control, I think, of, the actual words, and it's our copyright and all that stuff. But there are certain edits that, you have to go back and forth on, and, they do the cover, and they may give you options and ask for input, but at the end of the day, your contract says that they're the ones that do that. And what's interesting is with some of them, even they'll come out and they'll, like, there's always back and forth maybe between your title, the titles that I've come up with, my publishers liked and is kept. Sometimes, and this happens sometimes with romance authors, or at least one that I know, who actually, she's made the bestseller lists a couple times, more than a couple times. She said that, they had a cover that they really liked, and, they really liked the name of the book, the name that they chose, but it didn't quite match up with her manuscript. So she actually had to go in and add in some stuff that was on the cover and in the title of the book to make sure that it all gelled together. So,
she had to add writing into the book to match what was in the cover art.
Yeah, the cover art had a dog that everybody liked, and there was no dog in her book, so she went back and added a dog in a few scenes. So, the way I look at it, it's like anything else. The more money's at stake and who holds the money, the more they can dictate what happens with the product. So self-publishing, you are in control of absolutely everything, and the bigger contracts with the big five publishers, you hear stories, and sometimes maybe authors don't ever have to do those kind of compromises, but you hear stories that they do. I want to be clear that I would love to have those big contracts, and I am definitely willing to work with anybody
right.
who wants to give me big advances.
Those are tough problems to have, man.
Yeah,
those are really good problems to have.
At other times, it is nice, though, to know that, if you're working one-on-one with an editor with a smaller press, like you can say, no, I really think this change works, or here's what I was thinking here. And it's a lot more back and forth. And, working with different publishing houses, they all have their own way of doing it. And you talk to other authors and they have their own way of doing it. So, there's no one experience that you can really say, this is how it is to publish with this kind of publisher, and this is how it is when you do it this way. So,
but you said you prefer the sort of a smaller circle where you have more visibility and more say as an author and a creative force behind it all. Whereas the larger the circle gets, the more lost you get as the author.
I think I do, but like I said, my ultimate goal is to have major distribution, be in every Barnes and Noble and every bookstore in the country.
What's a bookstore?
Yeah,
what's a bookstore? I haven't been in a bookstore in 3.5 months.
Yeah,
oh my God.
Yeah, and actually that the biggest impact with all the COVID I'm about to start feeling it is not having a traditional book launch like that. Not having a sort of a party anywhere, not having a bookstore. Having people come in and sit at a table and sign your books and all that stuff.
Right.
And everyone's sales are down except for in different pockets that become popular, but overall publishing is down. Luckily, being with a smaller publisher, I didn't get $500,000 advance where they're expecting me to sell a ton of books. But I obviously want to sell a lot of books, so it's unfortunate, and that's the part that started to get to me as we get we're within a month of my launch, and a couple months ago I'd already started planning what bookstores I wanted to go to the first week of my launch. I'd started getting a hold of booksellers about making sure they had copies of Deep Background in there, and also making sure they knew they had a new book they had to order for me, and setting up start looking at your calendars for what's a good day for me to hold an event and do all that stuff. And then all of a sudden everything was shut down. So all of that stuff got axed. And then, like Barnes and Noble's like, we're still at 25% or 50% or whatever it is. The small independent bookstores too. So, I'll make sure my books are there, and I'll sign copies to be sold, for people who want to buy curbside or have it shipped to them. So now the push is all online.
Right.
We may try to do a virtual book launch and partner up with a bookstore, but that hasn't quite been nailed down yet. And we're coming up on like 21 or 22 days or whatever it is, or it's even less now, I think, from July 4th. So that's the major COVID effect that I've had. And if that's as bad as it gets, well, hey, I have a pretty short life going on, so I'm not gonna. That's not necessarily a complaint, but I mean that's and I already have a book out. I have a fan base. I have contacts. So I have people who know that I'm an author and who are looking for my next book, and I have a mailing list and all that stuff for debut authors who are just now trying to get that foothold. I cannot imagine how big of a sucker punch it must have been, whenever everything started shutting down.
Right. Like if you had to do deep background right now, like if you had to
Oh
launch
yeah,
your first full length novel right now during COVID, if July 4th was the launch of that instead of your follow up or with an
yeah,
existing fan base, you'd be in a whole
yeah.
separate scenario. Was July 4th always going to be the day, or was it supposed to be earlier and then you pushed it out a little bit, or was that the day
Uh,
all?
yeah, that wasn't affected by COVID, and actually, my publisher asked, "Do you want to move it to later on in the year?" And I had a couple thoughts. Well, this isn't my debut, so I do have people that are already expecting it to happen. And I had put in some digital marketing stuff already that was set to go. And then this last week, that actually got pushed to August. So there you go. I guess I could have pushed the release date a little if I'd have wanted to. But it was pretty clear that even if we'd had to push it a year to get the same kind of launch that people used to do.
Yeah, to
If
get
people
anything
had,
that resembled the
yeah,
normal. Yeah.
so July 4th was, as good a day as any, and it ties in thematically with Let the Guilty Pay, because it has two timelines, and one of those timelines takes place on the 4th of July in 1999. So it fit in thematically, and she'd already scheduled Jody Thompson, the publisher of Fox Press, who's going to be publishing Let the Guilty Pay. She had her summer schedule lined out. Before she set that, she had thought about fitting me in around November, but there's the election, which only matters because that's all anyone's going to be talking about for a month before and a month after. So getting any news coverage wasn't going to happen anyway. Of course, we're in the same boat now because if you're not talking about COVID, you're talking about a racial inequality. So
Right.
all of that's kind of out the window anyway.
Well, I'll tell
So
you what. In November, you might be hard pressed to get any press, any coverage, but anything you do get will be welcome because people are at that time of the year. People are sick and effing tired of
yeah.
the ads and the back and forth and this one and that. Like, I mean, I have a political demo. I haven't had an opportunity to do any political ads yet, but
Mm.
I'm half dreading them. Like, I'm hoping I get the good ones,
Yeah.
not the bad ones. Um, but so we've been talking about July 4th, and you've mentioned the title a couple of times. Let's tell everybody listening what they're going to be reading about. First, talk about Live with the Truth. Talk about your prequel that we were discussing earlier before the show, and how it ties into your new release, the full length coming out on July 4th. What are we looking at?
Yeah, so the series centers on the main character's name is Bartholomew Beck, who just goes by Beck, and the characters who I antagonize and call him Bart because he hates it. And he is a true crime writer, so not quite a journalist like a lot of my characters were in Deep Background, although there is a reporter who he kind of pairs up with in Let the Guilty Pay. But the series, technically, although I didn't write it first, I actually wrote the book first, and then the novella, I actually wrote that second. But if you go with the novella and then the book, the novella starts out, he's, his career in publishing is almost done. He had a big hit, some years ago, but he's struggling to pay rent, writing true crime books. And so he gets asked to look into the case of a woman who's on death row for shooting a local pastor in Weatherford, up a small town in North Texas. And essentially what happens is he starts investigating, and everybody's lying. And that's sort of a theme, in my books, which, with the Bartholomew Beck series, which I like because he's a true crime writer writing about the truth, and nobody ever tells the truth. And so it also affords a lot of opportunity for misdirection, for red herrings, because the books aren't quite standard mystery. They're certainly not cozy mystery. The tone is not quite as dark as Deep Background was, but it's definitely gritty and sort of noir. But anyway, really, it's his search for the truth, but also keeping up a big lie about his past and about the first book he wrote that was a bestseller. But that was even based on a lie, so he wasn't even telling the truth with that first book he wrote. And that part isn't a spoiler. But as you get further down the rabbit hole, as you read the novella and then the first book, you finally find out just how much deception has been going on, and the characters he meets are also not all who they seem to be. Right. And I know that was a pretty wandering. It wasn't exactly an elevator pitch. But I'll be honest, and I did not memorize those before I came on the show, so I should have. And it's funny, authors, whenever they go to talk about their books, like veteran authors, they have their pitches down, they have them memorized. But you ask an author to tell you about their book, and they give you a 2-minute answer, but really we all just want to say, well, just read it, and then you'll know what it's about. Why should I have to tell you? Just read the book. So
sorry, I didn't float that one to you earlier for you to prep. I'd rather you have the natural answer anyway, because I'm of the opinion, when I hear authors talk about their books that way, you could tell where the memorized part of begins and ends. And it's even though I'm listening to Stephen King or whoever's talking about their book, I know they're good, they're talented, they're creative. It still sounds like a sales pitch for that 15 seconds. So I'm glad you didn't come in memorized on that. That's totally fine. But what I was curious about with regards to Live with the Truth, did the idea for that get spawned after you'd already finished Let the Guilty Pay? And is that why you wrote it separately, or was it more of like a unique way to have it like as a marketing tool, like sort of like a teaser type of thing?
That's exact. I don't want to say I wrote it just so I could have a marketing tool. And I wouldn't have written it if I didn't think I had a good story to tell. And it is short, and I didn't go in saying it has to be this many words or anything like that. Mm-hmm. Because with a novel, it has to be a certain length, otherwise it's not a novel, and it's not really all that commercial, even in a small press setting. But I just wrote until the story was done, and really I thought I was going to go a little further with it, but then I ended on a chapter. And I was like, I'm not going to find a better ending than that. And then I wrote an epilogue that leads into Let the Guilty Pay. Mm-hmm. But yes, the idea was like, hey, if you have a prequel story you can tell, you can write that, and then we can release that digitally, and then you can use that as they call it a loss leader, where mm-hmm. you have something that's essentially free, and it's Kindle Unlimited, $2.99 to buy on Amazon. But it introduces you to the main character. And what's nice is I like those characters so much that actually I'm writing the sequel right now. And I brought in a couple of those characters, brought them back in because I got such a great response from my early readers and from other authors and from people who read Live with the Truth, that I brought a few of those characters back. And so now I'm about halfway through that sequel. So I'm figuring out how to almost finish a storyline a little bit like a trilogy, because once the secrets come out, you can only ride that train for so long. So then you have to, any more books, I'm going to have to find sort of a new device for the suspense, other than is his secret going to come out? Is everybody's secret going to come out? So.
Right, you can only dangle it out for so long at some point before you have to sort of you got to let it go. Well, it sounds like you found a good device for marketing. It's definitely a very modern approach. The
yes,
having the prequel, having the teaser book, having the loss leader, as you called it, especially in the world now of social media and digital marketing. Like, I follow you on all your platforms the same way you follow me back. And I see how you're putting it out there. I see, your frequency, your timing, your strategy. I see your mm-hmm. your social media marketing schedule, because I kind of have one too, although it's been on ice the last 3 months. But it's it's important to have that. So I mean, if you're taking your creativity and look, the words are still getting down on the paper, they're still able to be read, they're still being distributed. How you divide it up and dole it out is totally up to you as the artist, as the independent artist. There, you don't
Hmm.
have to I kind of got the sense that you almost wanted to apologize, not apologize, but you were like, yeah, I don't want to say I wrote it for that. It's
Yeah.
okay to. I think it's okay to have done that. I think that that's actually smart and tactical, and that's
Hmm.
having the business sense, the marketing sense, the sales approach sense, and not just the ability to get the words on the paper. That's essential to being a successful independent
Hmm.
artist. If you all you could do was paint the picture and couldn't get it out in front of anybody, it wouldn't make as much.
Right.
It wouldn't make a difference. If all you could do was read the words or do the Shakespeare or get it down on the paper, but you couldn't get it out in front of anybody to read it, it wouldn't make a difference. So I mean, the fact that you're doing it the smart way, the right way, and the modern way, I think is good.
Right. And the first time I saw it done was actually one of my favorite authors, Robert Dugoni, who sort of he had a popular series, and then he stopped writing for a while, and then he started writing with Amazon Publishing, not not Kindle Direct Publishing, not self publishing, but Amazon has its own publishing branch, and he writes for Thomas and Mercer. They're not considered the big five because it's only it's Amazon, but I mean it's just as big, so might as well be the big six.
Mm-hmm.
But I read the first book in his series because it was free for me for Amazon Prime, and then I discovered he'd written a prequel, and then I read that, and then he released another novella before his next Tracy Crosswhite book. That was his new series. So he did that a couple times, and I think this was like 2014 or something like that. So it's not necessarily new, but I think that Amazon had their authors set that pattern, and everyone's like, oh, that really works. So now I think a lot of small press and self-published independent authors are doing it that way, and it is smart. But I definitely sometimes you can tell if the story was written just for that, because I've read I read a lot, so if I felt like my story was going to read that way, I wouldn't have wanted to put it out there. And Fox Press did not pressure me into doing it by any means. They said, if you can, it is a smart, like you said, it's a smart marketing move,
Mm-hmm.
and we would love it if you could. But if it wasn't written into my contract necessarily or anything like that, and that's another thing I learned between smaller presses and the bigger presses. Some smaller presses, like the Deep Background, it was a totally different looking contract. It was very easy to read, very user friendly. Whereas with Fox Press, it was designed and modeled after the Big Five contracts. And I see why now having an agent is very advantageous if you're going to publish with those bigger outfits, because it's like a 12-page legal document that spells everything out, and there are deadlines for them, there are deadlines for me. There's who has the rights to what, how do you get them back, how can they terminate the contract, double indemnity, which I'll be honest, I still don't exactly know what it means, but I know that their wording matched the recommended wording from the Mystery Writers of America,
Right.
because they have a sample contract. So I was like, okay, good enough. And then I said, next time I sign a contract like that, I want to have representation, because I've enjoyed not having to give any of my money to an agent, but the way I see it, they would more than make up for it. If I was trying to negotiate $100,000 contract on my own, I would definitely want some representation. So
Yeah, no,
uh,
once you get into even a low orbit, you need to add some team members on. You need to have some
right.
allies and some advocates working for you in that. Even like I said, even in a very low orbit, that first book is out there. You managed to get through that process on your own, which is impressive. But once that happens, it's time to start bringing in the team members, like you were saying.
Mhm.
Um, so we're getting a little bit close to the end here. So before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you. You said Robert Dragoni that's your favorite author? I have never heard of
Uh,
him.
uh,
I'm not a big reader. I have to admit. I've got a 5-year-old. If it's not Dr. Seuss or
yeah.
Mo Willems, probably haven't read it lately.
Robert Dugoni, Dugoni. He's one of my favorites. he wrote My Sister's Grave was that first book in the Tracy Crosswhite series, and it truly, and I told this to him at Thriller Fest, it truly helped get me excited about reading fiction again because I read nothing but news because that's the business I was in. But it
Hmm.
got me excited about reading fiction again. And if it weren't for Amazon saying, "Hey, check out this new book," and the premise excited me, that and The Dead Key by D.M. Pulley, Pulley. That book was her debut, and it was also with Amazon Publishing. And I got the chance to meet her and tell her this too. Like those two books, I read them back to back. I don't remember which one was first, but after reading those books, I was like, I really want to try doing that because that moved me. Those books moved me so much. I want to be able to do that to readers, and I'd always wanted to do that, but life takes you on a long winding road, and of course that was probably somewhere around 2014, 15 in there whenever I read those books.
Hmm.
And then I didn't finish, the draft that I sent out to agents and editors for Deep Background. That was another couple of years. It took me to write that first one. And now in terms of other authors who I read and enjoy, I've had my eyes open to so many, meeting them at things like Thriller Fest and BoucherCon and the big, writing gatherings. It'd be hard to name them all. But books I would recommend: Your House Will Pay, which I know sounds a lot like my title. I came up with my title before I knew about her book. But Your House Will Pay by Steph Cha, Steph, short for Stephanie Cha.
Hmm.
That was a really great book, and it's more timely now than ever. It's kind of a look back at the race riots in LA, in the
Oh, in
90s.
'92. Yeah.
Yeah, and then
Sure.
also a fictional, sort of what's playing out now, a little bit on a smaller scale, just in LA, and those two things clashing. Um, and so that's a great book, and it's been nominated for awards. I hope it wins, a ton of them because it was one of my favorites of the last year. Um, you know, but books by Heather Young. Her new book, The Distant Dead, just came out, and I got to read an advanced copy because she read an advanced copy of mine and bought my new book. That's a sensational book too. She won awards and was nominated for her first book, The Lost Girls. August Norman is a good friend. So is John McMahon, and their debuts were nominated for and won awards. But there are so many authors out there now, which is great. There are only a few household names still, I think, but if anything, I would say people should. You used to be able to go in and ask your local bookseller, "Hey, what are the new books?" But you can probably still call them. You can still look on their websites. And what I try to do is read a little more diversely than I used to, because I read the big names. I read, Grisham and King and Patterson, and those
Mhm.
were the go-tos. But now I really make a conscious effort to read diversity in genre, diversity in authors, and to hear all the different voices. I read all the books by my self-published friends. Andrew Brandt, um, uh, he's hit number one with a couple of his books in categories on Amazon. So he's doing great things. His latest one, Paladuro, was written about Paladuro Canyon up here, so it's kind of love letter to the area. So everyone around here has really enjoyed it.
Mhm.
And then I've got authors who aren't published yet, but one of them, who I can't say anything about it yet, just signed a major deal, and he writes military thrillers, and it's going to be set up in this area too. So hopefully I'm starting to write a wave of new authors coming out of this area where we live, and trying to let people know about how life is in the Texas Panhandle.
It's funny how you said trying to hear the voice, trying to find the voice. When I was in college, I worked a security guard job from midnight to 8 one summer, and needless to say, that was the summer I got the most reading done in my life.
Hmm.
I read Grisham, I read Patterson, and that was when I discovered Along Came a Spider, which blew my
Hmm.
mind. I read The Firm, The Client, The Pelican Brief all in one summer. I read Forrest Gump by Winston Groom. I read
Oh, nice.
Semi Tough by Dan Jenkins. And what made all of these books, what made it possible for me to get through all of these books, other than being stuck at a desk for 8 hours overnight, was being able to assign a voice, assign a face and a character. I was able to sort of go into my mind's eye and watch the movie
Hmm.
as I'm reading. I
Exactly.
mean, I'm reading every word. And so in my defense, with the exception of Forrest Gump, I hadn't seen any of
Hmm.
those other movies. So there was no Along Came a Spider yet, and the Grisham movies didn't really appeal to me. But I was curious about the books, and I had said, "Let me read these books first before I see any."
Hmm.
I knew the rule and I respected it. But
Yeah.
I read my butt off that whole summer, and what I did was I every character, every scene, I assigned a voice. I assigned an actor, something that was familiar to me.
Hmm.
For the ones that were already movies, I knew I figured
Yeah.
out who was who, and for the other ones, I just kind of made it up. I don't know if you're familiar with Semi Tough by Dan Jenkins. It's a football book, and
I think
I
so.
don't know
Yeah.
if it was a movie at the time, but I just used the cast of North Dallas 40, and
Oh, yeah. There you go. Yeah.
it accomplished the same
Yeah.
thing for me. Um, but yeah, so it was when you said when trying to find the voice. I thought that was really interesting, and I wonder when you write, do you do anything like that? Do you imagine your characters personified in some way, either as an actor or a famous fictional character, or some kind of amalgam? As you're writing, do these characters sort of take form in any way for you as you're creating?
They do. The way it works for me is a lot of times I'll start writing, and I have characters, and then sometimes they'll just come up, and organically. Sometimes I like with Bartholomew Beck, like I knew who that character was, and he's a little more autobiographical than Levi Cole from Deep Background,
Hmm.
only because I took a job as research out on a Texas oil pipeline, working with my best friend who's a welder, and I was his helper, is what they call it, welder's helper. And so I already had half of the book. It's two timelines. I had one half of the book kind of, I knew where I was going with that, but the first half, in the present tense, I wasn't sure. The guy had like a sales job. When I first started, I was like, man, I don't know about all this. And then my friend was like, well, come out and work for me, and maybe it'll inspire you. And it really did, and it really turned out to be a great move on my part. But in that case, I had real people that I could pretty much model it after and combine a few folks. But a lot of the secondary characters, it's, I'll write and I'll know what has to happen, and, I'll write dialogue. And then as I get further in with those characters, the dialogue starts getting more colloquial, and they start getting their ticks or whatever it is. And by the end of the book, I have a really good feeling for who those characters are. So then that first revision is where you go back and you hear those characters talking early in the book. You're like, that's not how he would have said that. So then you go back and you sort of make the back match the front. And so that's happened the last couple times. So I figured that must be how it works for me, is that I discover who the characters are throughout that writing that first draft. And then I have to go back and make sure that, how the character is by the end of the book, that they have that same voice and they have those same quirks, in the beginning that I found through the, process of writing.
So when you do your first revision, it's sort of heavy and front loaded with
Yeah.
corrections and updates. And as you get further through, you start to zip through it a little more because you got to a point where you were already developed with your storytelling.
Yes. Yeah.
That,
For
that's
sure.
pretty cool. I like that. I two last questions for you before we wrap up. Asking for a friend. Who are the big five?
Oh, I would have to look that up. It's a term used for the giants in publishing: your HarperCollins, your Penguin Random House,
Okay, all right.
Hachette. Um, those are the three I can name off the top of my head. And of course, they all have different imprints. Like, William Morrow is who my friend just signed with, and they're an imprint of one of those giant mega corporations, and they're owned a lot of times by overseas corporations. And so that's why they're the corporate big five. They have the money to have billboards, in LA and New York about the new books coming out. They have actual TV commercials. I've seen James Patterson has TV commercials, that kind of stuff. The
Hmm.
Big Five has the marketing money to pay for that. And then the smaller presses, a lot of times they don't. I mean, I'll tell you what, if you read diversely, what you'll find, and this is no knock on the big name authors at all, but a lot of times that's the biggest difference between writing and getting published by a big five and getting published by a small press, or even indie published, because a lot of times the quality is still there. Now, it is a little more of a mixed bag with the self-published because, like I said, they control everything, and they may miss some stuff. Maybe they didn't pay an editor to do that kind of thing. You'll find that, and so that's why that got a bad rap. But I'm going to tell you, Fox Press and I bet I went through 4 rounds of editing, and then a final pass through myself. with a physical arc before it's going to get published in July. So the quality is there, and those books by the maybe the bigger small presses, the bigger independents, they win a lot of the Edgar Awards and the Thriller Awards and the
Hmm.
Anthony Awards, the big crime fiction awards, and even the Pulitzer sometimes too. Like a lot of those, books aren't published by the big five commercial presses either, because there are presses that specifically publish literary fiction and some of the best out there. So but that is the big thing is if you get published by a big five publisher, you're going to get a good amount of marketing money to put out there. And if people see a cover and see six news stories written about a book, they're much more likely to buy. And that's that's just how it is. That's what we wish we could all get. And we get in our local press and we get our social media, like you were saying. But if you've got a billboard up, on the Sunset Strip in the Times Square for a month leading up to your book, I mean, that's gonna have more
That'll help.
sales.
Yeah.
But those publishing houses are paying their authors a good amount of money up front, and so they have to make sure they sell those books. So that's why they have the marketing. Whereas with the smaller presses, a lot of times, like I said, it's a good thing that I'm not trying to launch a big five book right now because I don't think I could earn out in advance. Whereas with a small press, the money's a little different. So I think that if it won't come as quickly, but I think overall sales, I think will still come within a year or so for this book.
Well, it sounds like the structure, the smaller structure is set up to enable you to be more productive at a higher rate, to produce more material, to generate a following, generate a
Mhm.
buzz, and if you do enough of that, then that's what draws you up to the higher orbit, to the next level of orbit.
Yeah,
Um,
there's a romance author around here. Her name's Bethany Clare. Writes great historical romance novels, and she was writing so much and so often. I mean, she was making six figures, running her own thing. And she talked at our local Texas High Plains Writers meeting, and she was having to take a little bit of a hiatus because she burned herself out. She was so productive and producing so much, but she was writing so much. But there was also, like I said, there's all that comes with that. With each book comes all those decisions. So that's part of it too. But if you can write, 8, 12 books a year, I mean, that's a real
that's
steady
a lot.
stream.
That's
Yeah,
pumping them out.
I don't think that I could ever be quite that productive. But part of that for me is that I've never written a series before. Deep Background was a standalone. It's going to remain a standalone unless I come up with a great sequel down the road somehow. But with this Bartholomew Beck series, I'm going to keep going as long as Fox Press and I want to, and as long as I have a story to tell. So the second one is coming together a little quicker than the first one, but I bet I wrote that in a year and a half. And so this one I'm trying to get done in 6 months or less, which you would think I could have just knocked it out with the quarantine. But I'll tell you, it's a little different not having structure in your life and stuff like that. Like it's a little
There.
counterproductive, which is a strange
Completely.
psychological phenomenon. But I'm definitely not the only writer who's been saying that, who's been online being like, I should write a ton today, but it's just not going to happen. My brain is not there.
I don't know what it is about this whole thing. There seems to be two extremes and then multiple layers in between. There's other people who are thriving and blossoming. They're getting so much done. At least in the voiceover world, I see for the first few weeks, people were just like, "Oh my God, I got another COVID PSA today," and I didn't get any of those. But there's other people who, like, I had a 5-year-old that I was homeschooling all day, every day, and I had a wife who got laid off, and the kid knew just what to do to keep me away
Mm.
from the pursuit. But yeah, there's these two different extremes. There's all these layers. So there's no one way that's more right or wrong. It doesn't mean that I wasn't doing enough. I was busier than a one-legged man in an ass kicking contest. But it just
Yeah, yeah,
I had these specific things to do ass kicking about, and I wasn't able to do the other stuff. It was funny. I, I almost started laughing. I tried so hard not to laugh. I didn't want to be disrespectful when you're talking about your author friend who's so busy. But when you mentioned historical romance novels, I immediately imagined like George Washington erotica.
oh no.
Like, yeah, like George and Martha Washington, and I'm not even gonna.
It would be similar to the Outlander series, is what she writes.
Okay, all right. I figure I'm like I knew I had no doubt that my demented, twisted brain went somewhere completely off the deep end. But that's what I was. At one point, you were talking, and I kind of went like I chuckled a little bit because I pictured George and Martha Washington porn. Oh boy, it's getting late. So what
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
yeah, let's wrap it up. What I want you to do, take a moment real quick. You've got Deep Background is available currently on hard
Hmm.
copy, digital, and Audible audiobook,
Hmm.
narrated by yours truly. You also now have Live with the Truth, a digital novella that is available on
Hmm.
Kindle, correct?
Yes. Hmm.
And that is the short prequel to Let the Guilty Pay, which is coming out July 4th, also on hard copy and Kindle digital, correct?
Yeah, and when you say hard copy, I do want to make sure it's paperback. I don't have anything published in hardback. A lot of times that is for bigger presses, and also I've had opportunities to publish Deep Background in hardcover, but I would rather do it. I guess I'm a little old fashioned because you're supposed to have the hardcover and then the paperback come out after that. So I don't want to do it in reverse because that hardback, that first time that a publisher publishes a book of mine in hardback is going to be a milestone for me because
Mm-hmm.
you get your first book published. Obviously that's a big milestone, and there are other ones along the way. But to hold a hardcover, I want that to be special, and I want it to be the first edition of one of my books. So, but yeah, it's the Deep Background's available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook. Live with the Truth is Kindle only. It is in Kindle Unlimited, as is Deep Background. It's Kindle Unlimited, so it's only available on Amazon. Let the Guilty Pay is available for pre-order basically wherever you buy your books in paperback and in ebook, so it's wide. That's one thing that Fox Press is doing. It's going to be on all platforms, no matter how you want to buy. And this is going to be coming out sometime near or around early July. Am I right on that? This podcast?
This podcast, actually, I will definitely get it on. It'll be on in June. It could very well be next week.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then I'm gonna have to hold off on a little bit. I was gonna give you some breaking news, but I'm embargoed until July.
Okay.
Um, yeah, but
All right.
suffice it to say, there will be no.
Tell me after we wrap. I want to be in on it, but I won't air it. I promise.
Gotcha. Well, actually,
I
you
won't.
already know.
I already know. Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So I can't quite and
All
plus
right.
you want to let your newsletter people kind of have that too. But if you were going to air this around July, I was gonna let it slip. But
Yeah. No.
unfortunately,
It's probably gonna be early next week. Probably gonna be just about a week from now.
gotcha.
Right.
That it's funny. Publishing it is that it's having all this news that you can't share until it's time to share it. And so I'm definitely not the first author to say, "Oh, I got some big news that I'll tell you about in 2 weeks."
Right. Oh, it's the same thing with being an actor. You just got to sign the non-disclosure agreement. You go to set. You learn your
Oh, I
line.
can't imagine.
You
Yeah.
do all this stuff. You play a superhero for 18 months, but you can't tell your mother. It's just, and it made me think of when you were talking about the book with the cover and the dog. It made me think about it made me related to acting as well. It's how just these little things come up once you get to that high level of retail sale and numbers and productivity. So many little other factors become decision makers because there's a picture of a dog on the cover. There's now a dog in the book.
Hmm.
Sometimes the person who gets cast in the movie gets cast because when they were looking at the video of all the actors, this one person made the dog's tail wag. The dog that was
Oh,
in like
wow.
this it could be anything. There's this person has the right hair. This person acted better, but this person's the right height. Like it's 1,000 different things. I would have never in a million years guessed that the dog on the cover caused the dog to be written into
Yeah.
the book, but it happened and it's real. And that same kind of crap happens in Hollywood and casting in New York and
Amazing.
Broadway theater everywhere. You don't have the part until you're on stage saying your lines or the camera's rolling.
Hmm.
It could go in any direction. Rick, real quick, tell people where they can find you online, social media, your website, all that stuff. If people want to find you and follow you and learn more about you, where can they go? What should they do?
My website is ricktreon.com, RICKTREON. And there are links to all my social media there. And I've been on social media a long time. I was a beta on Twitter. I was with like the second wave of Facebook. If you've seen the social network, I was not Ivy League, but that second group of colleges that got to go in. I was right there with those. So
Nice.
been on that stuff for forever. But on Twitter, I'm at RD as in dog, T as in Treon 4, because my full name is Richard Darius Treon the Fourth. So those are my initials. And like I said, I was a college kid, so that seemed funny to me. So that's my Twitter. On Instagram, I'm just at Rick Treon. On Facebook, I'm Rick Treon Author. I think that's, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and then my website. I have a YouTube channel. I think it's just my name. But I don't have any subscribers, and I think I have like 15 views. So you don't have to go to my YouTube if you don't want.
I'll subscribe to you tonight, man. I'm on YouTube as well. I'll hook you up. I'll give you a thumb tonight. Don't you worry, my man.
All righty.
Ricky, we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank you for being on tonight. I really appreciate you talking to everybody, telling them about what it takes to be an independent artist. And stay tuned for just a second after we wrap up. I want to make sure we get your outro. And thanks for being with us today, my man. I really appreciate it. It was good talking to you.
Thanks, Steve. This is really, really great. I'm glad you had me on.
All right, thanks, everybody, for listening to the Stage Door Show. You have a good night.
Hi, this is novelist Rick Treon, and you're listening to The Stage Door Show, celebrating the independent artist.